Hello, welcome to episode 4 of Craft the Draft for the 2025 season. I'm Mitch. I'm joined by Jonty, our draft whiz expert. Jonty, how are you?
Yeah, very good, Mitch. Keen to get into this episode. There was a stack of representative footy across the weekend, but we've got a great opportunity now that the season has started to start to answer some of those big questions that are starting to emerge around the 2025 draft crop and beyond. So we've got some talking points, and then we'll answer your questions at the end as well.
Yeah, big show coming up. We're going to have a bit of a focus on the AFL mid-season draft and maybe more of an AFL lens, and with some mention of the prospects they could be looking at. We'll answer some of the big draft questions and some fan submitted draft questions, as you mentioned. So plenty to get stuck into. And obviously, if you ever want to be engaged and involved, you can do so on Craft the Draft's Instagram page, on Zero Hangers YouTube page, and on zerohanger.com.au. And on that site, you can find the draft order. We'll have our mid-season draft order up probably a bit closer to when we get to the count at the end of May. But there are probably several clubs who we can circle as likely, well, at least we'll have selections, but will likely make selections at the mid-year intake. Essendon could have up to 3, given they've lost Tom Edwards, Sam Draper, and Nick Bryan for the rest of the season. So that'll give them something to think about, particularly in the ruck department, where they look at a VFL and mature age option there, and potentially not rely on a Todd Goldstein, who probably might not be able to see out 16 games and potential finals opportunities this year. And then Vigo Vincentini, the other one, might be a little too raw to throw into the deep end just yet. So there might be a few options there for the Bombers. West Coast and Western Bulldogs both have selections, having held over spots from the rookie draft and SSPs. Carlton will have one in the form of Brody Kemp. Moving him to the inactive list will give them a spot in the mid-season draft. Same with Collingwood with Reef McInnes following his long-term injury as well. And then Gold Coast with Charlie Ballard. So they're the clubs that will have opportunities for spots, and there are probably a couple others as well. You look at Port Adelaide with Todd Marshall and where they see his recovery at in probably the coming month. Richmond, big questions over Dion Prestia's Achilles injury. Carlton with Nick Newman, similar position with Todd Marshall, and whether they weigh up what their options are. I wouldn't have thought they would look to the mid-season draft as much as the others. And Brisbane probably in a similar boat with Carlton, with Lincoln McCarthy, who, like Newman, is making a push for the end of the year. So they're the clubs at the current point of view. Just after round 6, we've got, I think it's another 4 or 5 rounds to go before we lock in the draft order. But who are the names? And we mentioned Essendon's ruck situation with going down with Draper and Bryan, but who are the names do you think the Bombers could be looking at come the mid-season draft, whether it's a ruckman or elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's been widely reported, Mitch, that Cooper Keogh is one that they're quite keen on, and his name was one that actually got a bit of attention from them last year as well, before they ultimately decided to overlook him, but has played some really strong footy across the last 18 months or so in the VFL since crossing from North Melbourne at the end of 2023. He's that player who covers the ground so well, he hardly comes onto the bench. His tank is magnificent for a ruck. He's really physical as well, but it does seem like if he is going to get picked up in the mid-season draft, it would be by Essendon. They're the main suitor for him at the moment. Then there's some other names that we can run through that might be of interest to some of those other clubs that you referenced. So Charlie McCartan now seems like he's just about a lock to get taken at the mid-season draft. Obviously, the brother of Tom McCartan and Paddy McCartan. His marking has been magnificent to start the season for Geelong VFL, and he's taken a real step forward with his footy. Jane Munn is one that was on the radar in pre-season quite early. He hasn't necessarily been spoken about as much in recent weeks, but he's certainly right there or thereabouts in terms of at the pointy end of mid-season draft reckoning as a developing project type of player from Port Melbourne. So look out for him because he's developed excellently across the last 12 months. From a talent league perspective, the main names are Zach Walker, Floyd Burmeister, and also Rod Ali, who we've spoken a fair bit about that trio across the last few weeks or so. Walker and Ali as those interceptors, and then Burmeister as a developing tall, who played another really strong game on the weekend for Vic Country. Massimo Razzo and Tom McCarthy out of the Richmond VFL footy factory, I suppose it's becoming for mid-season prospects, are also in that top echelon. And then you could add Nathan Kruger and Cooper Herbert to that as well. Nathan Kruger, obviously a mature age option, and then Cooper Herbert playing really well for Calder. So they're probably the names at the moment that are at the front of the queue as the players are starting to really make their cases, and there has been some footy played this year.
I want to raise one of those names with you, Fleur Burmeister, a player you have been very big on since, I guess you go back to last year's draft and him being overlooked. But you've almost noted him as probably the best player not on an AFL list half as we go through the early rounds of the Coates Talent League season and obviously state league competitions as well. So what kind of player do you think a club is getting if they're looking at a player like Floyd?
Yeah, and that's been probably the issue with him and why he got overlooked last year was that there was so much conjecture about what he is at the next level. And some see him as that forward, some see him as a ruck, some see him as a centre half back in the long term. But I think he's really established himself now as a forward. He's played some really strong footy across the first month of the season, 3 goals in round one, 6 scoring shots, or 8 scoring shots rather in round one. And then he had the 3 scoring shots in round two and then kicked the 3 goals for Vic Country. He hasn't necessarily kicked straight, unfortunately, across the first few weeks. But yeah, he's a really lively marking type whose follow up is really, really strong as well, and his athleticism and ability to leap at the ball make him a really dangerous prospect, probably as a key forward or a centre half forward who can get up the ground with his running capacity.
Now, I would have said over summer, if you asked me who the best player outside the AFL was, I would have said Harry Boyd. Thankfully, he's on an AFL list. But this is the segue into a name I think could be worth mentioning, Alex Van Wyk at North Adelaide. Now, why I mentioned him with Harry Boyd is he was at Norwood last year, stuck behind Harry Boyd for the whole year, couldn't get a gig given the Magarey medalist was holding the first string ruck duties at the parade. Now, moved to the off-season, and Harry Boyd's future is a bit up in the air, given he was invited to St Kilda to train with them. Now, while Norwood were trying to figure out if they're going to keep him or not, they had Alex on their list, hoping he would stick around, but he thought, if any chance that Harry comes back to Norwood, I'm going to shoot off. Gone to North Adelaide and had a dominant start. Actually came up against the Redlegs in his first game at Samford level and was absolutely instrumental for North Adelaide. Import was a pretty dominant ruck performance. Had another game on top of that, but an ankle injury has since sidelined him. Was part of the Samford squad side as well. The extended squad before that got cut short. I think that ankle injury might have hurt his chances of playing in that state game as well. So hopefully if he makes a return from that ankle injury in the next week or so, might give him just enough run to catch the eye again for the mid-season draft. So he's one out of the sample I think that could be worth mentioning for some of the clubs and there are usually many that look for ruck prospects in this mid-year intake. So you got Floyd as a ruck forward option. You got Cooper Keogh, as you mentioned, out at Coburg. Braden Crosley's more that ready-made, right here, right now option if Essendon wants to go down that route. And then I think Alex is another more younger, raw talent, but someone who's shown some pretty good signs pretty quickly against state league opposition. So he'll be one to watch, I think, as well over the coming weeks, depending on his injury and his form at the Samford level for North Adelaide. Now let's roll in to some questions, some of our questions that we're kind of keen to get to the bottom of, and then some from the fans as well. The first one we want to look at, though, is what's obviously being talked as one of the most compromised draft, if it isn't the most compromised draft, just given the academy father-son ties through the plethora of first-round draft picks that could be used at the end of this year. And we could look at potentially 30 prospects or more taken. I think 2023 had 29, and then last year's got close to that mark as well. But you think that there could be 30 plus prospects taken in the 2025 count first round?
Yeah, I think that's what the industry view is. 30's probably low, like people would say even up towards 35. So that if it does get up towards 35, that would mean that every second player obviously taken in the first round is a club tied prospect. So just to reel off some of those names: Dan Annable to Brisbane, Tom McGuan to Collingwood, Zach McCarthy to Collingwood, Adam Swaden, Hussein Al Ashkar to Essendon, Zeke Ewell and Dylan Patterson, Bo Adamsall to Gold Coast, Louis Callaway to Richmond, Max King, Noah Chamberlain, and Lockie Carmichael to Sydney. Now, we have to preface that all of that is assuming that the clubs do indeed match bids that are likely to come in the first round for those players. But yeah, it's obviously going to be a point of interest given that there are more and more difficulties for clubs needing to match the points because the AFL have tightened the rules, but we know that clubs tend to find a way. So there is an expectation that the draft will be, well into the 30s for the first round this year.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating situation at Gold Coast. They already hold 3 first-round picks, so they're in good stead for their academy trio. Sydney, have their first round selection. Obviously, if they lost Chad Warner, they might be in a better position for the draft. But I don't know if that's the win or loss there for the Swans fans. And as you mentioned, they've certainly made it harder this year. I think if Brisbane used the same picks they did last year to get Levi Ashcroft at pick 5 this year, I think they'd have half the points that they needed. So it's going to be quite interesting to see which clubs and how active they are in the draft pick swapping space come the off season, and just about where these prospects are lining up. Next question we're going to look at is a pick 1 update. Obviously, it's a pretty even field. Some might think. I think there's 4 or 5 that might be flagged as the pick 1 favorite. But how do you kind of see the race for the Ducks of the draft shaping this year?
It's really interesting, that pick one race, because I think the only player who has really knocked hard on the door in the first month of the season that was considered in preseason as being a pick 1 contender is Cooper Duff-Tytler. However, there is clearly in AFL circles a tendency in recent years to go away from putting as much emphasis on rucks, generally speaking. So how much of a premium clubs are willing to pay for a top end tall will be something of great interest at this draft. It's not just Cooper Duff-Tytler at pick 1. You've also got players like Archie Ludovic, Cody Curtin, Taj Murray is another one, and Liam Heatherton too, who are all in the AFL Academy, and then some others behind them. We know that there are a lot of talls at the last draft who did fall down the order: Alex Dodson, Matt Whitlock, Job Shanahan, Harry Armstrong, to name a few. But in terms of that pick one race, I think Cooper Duff-Tytler on merit is winning it, and I do think there will be a club that would be willing to take a punt on him, just given he offers so much more than what you would ordinarily think of for a tall. He's got so many strings to his bow. So he's the one that's at the front at the moment. The others probably had quieter starts to the season, being Willem Dersma, although he did play that one really, really strong game in round 1, and Dyson Sharp, or their club linked in Dan Annable and Zeke Uland.
How do you see the, talls this year across the competition? How do you see them being assessed? Because obviously, as you mentioned, the rucks can be a bit of an anomaly in their own right. Like, I don't think we've seen the rucks taken too highly. Ethan Reid a couple of years ago, and that was maybe Gold Coast being forced into that bid. Luke Jackson a few years before him taken as a top 5 selection, but it's very rare that we see a ruckman taken that early. And then I think key position players as well. We had obviously Jed Walter a couple of years ago, midfield heavy last year. So how do you see this year's breed of key position players across all 3 lines being assessed?
Yeah, well, I think it's a draft where we naturally will see more key position players taken higher up, because I think the gap between the key position players and I guess that next rung of midfielders, obviously that elite crop of midfielders as well, but that next rung of midfielders is big enough to warrant taking a punt on a key position at all. And given that clubs obviously are coming off the 2024 draft where there was such a surplus of midfield talent, I think they're probably back that there's a level of that they've probably got the assets they need from that draft. But yeah, it'll be one to keep a close eye on, because I think there's certainly some key forwards in particular who warrant selection in the top 10 to 15. It'll just be a question of whether clubs are willing to take a risk on a pick like that so high.
Obviously, with the key position players, they take time to develop. Maybe it's a year or 2, as we've seen with some over the last few years. But others, and maybe more the midfielders, the flank options, the small forwards, dashing defenders, can be used pretty quickly. And I think 2024's draft class, if it's not for an injured player like a Lombard, a Jagger Smith, and Alex Taru, just about most of that first round have made their debuts and even held roles across the first 6 rounds of this season. Do you see that trend continuing into 2025 and having these ready-made prospects come November?
No, I think there'll definitely be fewer next year that impact in their first year. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Reason one is like you talked about, there's going to be a few more tools that are taken at the top end. Reason two is that I think the clubs who are likely to get the talent that is more AFL ready are the ones that have already got strong depth. So I'm thinking your Brisbanes and your Gold Coasts in particular. Gold Coast obviously look to be building something really special this season, or certainly building towards something special. So trying to break into that side might become a little bit more difficult as the years do progress. So yeah, and there's a couple of other clubs that you could throw into that category as well. So I think it'll be a little bit harder, but yeah, certainly we are seeing that the top end players, or the ones that are most AFL ready, are able to match it quicker and quicker. So no doubt there'll still be a couple of those, but I don't think the number will be as high as what we've seen this year, where it's been, yeah, so impressive and really entertaining to watch.
Sticking with the profile of this year's prospects and their positions and how they'll fit in at the top level. Obviously, North Melbourne were a big talking point last year. Took Finn O'Sullivan quite early and then decided to trade back into the first round at the very end of the draft to get Matt Whitlock, who's made his debut and has looked solid at the VFL level, as given their need for key position players. But if they wanted another bite of the apple this year in the top few spots, they haven't got that, having traded away their first round pick to Richmond to get access to Whitlock. So that could be a bit of an issue for North Melbourne, just given that it's probably about time they start looking to draft some key position players right at the top end. But this looks like they might be missing out this year.
Yeah, well, they certainly will be. You summed it up perfectly. It's, you look at the last sort of 3 or 4 years when they've had so many picks, and they've been midfield heavy. Finally, there's a key position heavy draft, if you call it that. And yeah, North Melbourne don't have any picks in that top echelon because they did trade one away. So that's something that will hurt them and their list balance down the line. Tassie's inception into the competition in a couple of years is something else that'll be interesting to watch at this year's draft. So while there'll be clubs that'll be keen to do certain things with regards to getting savvy to match points, like the Gold Coast Suns and the Brisbane Lions, Carlton could be another one. There might be some clubs who are willing to trade into this year's draft, even though it is so compromised, knowing that the next couple of years are going to be quite compromised with Tassie coming into the competition. The other thing to keep an eye on, the best players out of Tassie, if they aren't taken in the first round, they're going to get 2-year contracts. What does that mean? They come out of contract for Tassie's first year into the competition. So no doubt if they do have an impact in the first couple of years at AFL level, then Tassie will be coming hard for them, would be what you'd think on surface level. So that'll be another consideration for clubs to make. Are these players going to be affected by the go-home factor, which has never been a question for players from Tassie in the past, given they've never had an AFL team. But keep an eye on that one. So players like your Jasper Hayes, your Lucas Wootons, your Riley McHenrys, if they can push themselves up.
Next question, how do the Coates Talent League clubs view 19-year-olds and whether that could alter after going forward? So what would be the plan for those kind of clubs and these overage prospects that we see pop up on mid-season draft radars quite early?
Just one I want to put on the radar. Know that Zach Walker and Rod Ali are two of the 3 or 4 players who are viewed as the most likely to get taken at the mid-season draft. Now, neither of them played any footy at Coates Talent League level at all last year. Zach Walker, a couple of seasons of senior footy at Phillip Island since representing Gippsland in 16s. Rod Ali, local football and more of a focus on basketball. There's always a real talking point at clubs in that sort of December period about which 19-year-olds to bring back, and a belief that if they bring them back, they can have a strong preseason, could get taken at the mid-season draft. I'd like to see clubs have a bit more of a punt on these left field options from local footy who might have dominated, missed out on their chance as an 18-year-old, whether they didn't have the work ethic or whether they trained for a preseason and then didn't quite make the cut, but then have gone to senior footy and shown a little bit more. Because what those two players show is that there's certainly an opportunity for players from left field, and the fact that there's many, many others who were viewed coming into the season as being strong chances and haven't necessarily been able to show it is something interesting as well. With AFL recruiters, sometimes an issue can be where if you get overexposed to a player, then instead of I guess, appreciating what they are able to do. You start to become a little bit more conscious of what they aren't able to do, which perhaps happens with some of these players, whereas the new players who they haven't seen before, you're more willing to take a speculative punt on. So something to keep an eye on. Sam Toney, you could throw into that same category. Yes, he didn't get drafted last year, but Dandenong, a really gutsy move to bring him in from local footy, got him a state combine invite and put him right on the precipice. So just a couple that have happened in the last couple of years to back up my theory, and it's just a watch for me at this stage.
Yeah, I think one that always comes to mind, Sam Switkowski. This would have been, 2015 maybe. Got that extra year at the Northern Knights. Solid without, standing out, but then got him an opportunity at Box Hill, and then that opportunity at Box Hill ended up being a platform for him to get drafted straight out of the VFL as a bit of an older prospect to Freo come,
Yep.
what would have been 2017. So, certainly love those little stories of players getting in those other chances, and whether they get them straight away or not. Hopefully it always works out in the end. Now, we can't talk this week without mentioning some of the Vic trials from over the weekend. So obviously we flagged last week a lot of the players to watch, but who were the players that stood out from the two trials from the weekend?
Yeah, so there were a few. So Vic Metro played Vic Country in the two trial matches on Good Friday at Avalon Airport Oval. Xavier Taylor's one who stood out, and that continues a really strong start to the season for him. He's a tall defender, but can play on talls and smalls and showed a lot. Sam Grill was the main standout across the day. He really, really impressed those in attendance. And with him, it's not necessarily the number of disposals he wins. You always feel like he wins sort of 5 to 8 more disposals. Then you look at the stats sheet, you're like, geez, but he finds a way to impact the game with a lower possession count just because of what he's able to do with the footy. Blake Chambers, a surprise packet from the Eastern Rangers, was quite good as well. On the wing, Zach Walker continued to press his mid-season draft case, and Brody Atkins, who's been chalked up quite a lot by the Gippsland Power in recent times, had his best game of the season, 30 disposals and 2 goals, and was able to get involved in possession chains, usually more of that inside midfielder, but his transition running was quite strong and his ball use as well. So yeah, that were some of the stronger performances, but certainly Sam Grill was the main one who set himself apart from the pack. And it's worth noting that the AFL Academy players were arrested. Obviously, there was a game that they played last weekend against Richmond VFL, and they're playing this weekend again against Coburg VFL. So just being in the middle of those two, there was no AFL Academy players in action.
Now let's get stuck into some fan questions. Now, we might do a mailbag here and there, I think, and you can always head over to our Instagram page, Craft of the Draft, to be involved and see if you can get your question answered. We had plenty coming through, so we've picked off a fair few to run through. And the first one is from Matty Friend, who says, who's the best explosive mid in the Sam Lawler or Jason Horne-Francis mold that isn't tied to a club in 2025?
Yeah, outstanding question, because I think the first 8 or 9 that came to mind, were all club tied. And I think when you you take that away and you say they can't be club tied, it makes it very, very difficult to pick out a player. I think this draft crop is one that doesn't necessarily have that top end midfielder that you talk about. Like, you could say an Ollie Greaves or you could say Max King, but I see them as more so being players who use their body and use their size and strength to really impact, rather than that explosiveness that you're talking about with Sam Lawler and Jason Horne-Francis. Probably the closest comparison I could give you is Allies listed Ryder Corrigan, but he's had a quieter start to the season, but will be one worth will be one who will be keen to push his case in the next few weeks.
We have from Gus Redden, best bottom ages in 2026 and the 2027 draft crops coming through.
Yeah, so there was a couple of under 16s trials as well on Easter Thursday. So I'll run through some of the names that impressed there from a 2027 perspective. So Kobe Buick was the main one, an Essendon father-son prospect, who, yeah, he's a midfielder and racked up plenty of the footy. Tavita Roden, he's an Essendon Next Generation Academy prospect and a Port Adelaide father-son, the son of David Roden, who's obviously now a goal umpire. Louis Salopek, playing for the Dandenong Stingrays and Vic Country. He is a Port Adelaide father-son, and he plays in the midfield and off half-back. Baxter Schruck is a strong-bodied midfielder, the brother of VFL pair Tyson and Mitch Schruck. And then Slade Law, Oscar Henwood, and Eli Kravich. Eli Kravich, a Collingwood Next Generation Academy prospect, are some others to watch out for from 2027. From 2026. Dougie Cochran, Archie Butler are a couple we've talked a fair bit about. Likewise, Marlon Neocleus, Cody Walker too, being a Carlton father-son. And then some others worth referencing who have actually had really strong starts to the Talent League season. Marcus Prasad, he was excellent in that game for the under-18s Vic Country trial on Good Friday. He's a small, creative forward. Noah Williams is someone who was put on the radar in preseason by the Geelong Falcons and has had a good season so far. And then Jack Pickett to a tall forward. And then Lucas Robinson out of WA. I want to put his name on the radar too because he had a strong under-16s championships and Australia a little bit in a preseason match and then on the weekend as well. So he's a midfielder to watch out for from South Fremantle.
All right, next question from Trout87 is how deep is this year's group of small forwards?
Yeah, similar to what we were talking about with the strong-bodied midfielders in that Sam Lawler mold. The small forwards. So let me reel off a few. So Hussein Al Ajkar, Essendon linked. Tyson Gresham, Carlton linked. Jai Saxoner, Collingwood linked. Wes Wally, he's West Coast linked. Mingara Clark, Carlton linked. So they're some of the top small forwards who will be tied to clubs at this year's draft. The next best three would be Lockie Doverston, but he's not probably your traditional small forward type. He's got that crumbing ability, but he's got the ability to get up the ground. So he's probably more of a high half forward. He's got the ability to impact at stoppage as well. Ricky Theodoropoulos, similar vein. He can impact at stoppage, get high up the ground. And Tom Matthews, he's probably the most traditional of the small forwards that isn't tied to clubs, and he hasn't been in the Vic Country Summer Hub. He has, however, had a strong preseason and start to the season, so I do expect that he will get into that Summer Hub. But get into that side. But yeah, he's probably the one that best fits that mold.
Now, looking at the Suns Academy prospects, you've got Dill Patterson, Bo Adamsall, and Zeke Hewland. H. Wills is asking who's the most likely not to end up at the Suns?
It's a good question, because like we said, it will be more difficult for AFL clubs to match a bid this year. I do think the Suns will end up with all three if they want all three. However, it's worth noting they do have a few other draft prospects deeper in the draft, so they want to prioritise one of those sorts of players. Then they may have to overlook one of those top three. However, I do think if they want to take those top three, as we expect they do, they'll get all three. To answer the question, though, I think Bo Adamsall's the one slightly behind the other two. I think Dylan Patterson and Zeke Gillen's points of difference are just a little bit bigger.
Question from Magical Places is who is the most likely to win a Coleman Medal in their career? Bit of a big question.
Liam Heatherton. Yeah, I've got him as the best key forward in the draft, and that's because I think he's got the most upside, and therefore it probably translates to likelihood to kick a lot of goals.
Question from Felix Knight. Thoughts on Jacob Marin, aka the Brick Wall?
Yeah, he's one that we probably haven't given a lot of attention to so far this season, but he's impressed me the couple of times that I have watched him. He's yeah, like Felix describes him as, he's really hard to get past in defence. He's been a surprise packet for the Western Jets, and he's quite immovable in one-on-one contests, so I really like him.
One from Hob JPEG. Thoughts on Taj Murray and Sam Cumming?
Yeah, I like Sam Cumming. I've got him in the top 15 at this point. So he's right there or thereabouts. He's so composed in traffic, and you know what you're going to get from him. He's high volume. He's really consistent across the board. Doesn't really have too many weaknesses. Taj Murray, a bit of a project ruckman. Yeah, we've talked about how many tools there are. Is he one that falls as a result of the number of tools and others having strong starts to the season? I'm not sure, because if a club is looking long term, he certainly has a lot of attributes.
Thomas Sullivan's asked, where does Max Lee sit?
Yeah, Tommy Sullivan, a teammate at the Dandenong Stingrays, or former teammate of Max Lees. I like him, but I just haven't seen much of him. Unfortunately, he was really good in the first three matches of 2024, then was injured for the rest of last year, and then got a concussion, which has ruled him out of the last couple of weeks. But yeah, a really energetic rebounding defender that has some traits that lend itself well. It's just a matter of hopefully being able to produce it on a consistent basis and get on the park, so some continuity for his footy as well.
Got a question, a bit of a theme to this show at the moment from Atul Ayapan is who are the best ruck prospects?
So Cooper Duff Tytler is the obvious answer. Whether he plays primary ruck at the next level is a different question. But I'm still conflicted on that, just given his height. He's 200 centimeters, but he does have a really good leap on him. Is he more of a key forward who goes into the ruck? I'm not sure. Um, Behind him, though, it's interesting because, yeah, there's so many tools. There was Taj Murray, who's in the AFL Academy, who's definitely a ruck at the next level. But the others are all either key forwards or key defenders. They're not quite tall enough to be rucks. And that probably goes for the couple that are just outside of the AFL Academy and pushing or knocking on the door. Um, so the best pure rucks other than Taj Murray, I'd go Miles Tyra, Vic Metro. He's really aggressive, good follow-up work in the contest. And Cooper Ramsey has some raps on him from WA as well.
And the last question from the fans from C. Blackman is, how is Xavier Taylor shaping up?
Yeah, I referenced him before as being one of the most impressive at the Vic Metro trials, and he can play on tools, he can play on smalls. He's really clean. He keeps the ball in front of him, doesn't let it get out the back. Knows how to position himself in a one-on-one contest, and he's getting involved more and more on offense. So coming out of the back line, those counter attacks, I really like him. Yeah, he's done everything he can to start the season. Vic Metro Summer Hub member, but probably one that's a little bit more unheralded than some others. But yeah, he's doing everything he can to put himself on some maps.
Well, there you have it. All your questions answered. If you want to stay engaged with Craft of the Draft, you can head over to our Instagram page, zerohanger.com, and Zero Hangers YouTube channel. Jonty, what have we got coming up? Obviously, champs are a little bit away. We've got an AFL Academy game this weekend, but what can we be looking forward to over the coming weeks?
Yeah, well, we've got the Young Guns series on the next couple of weeks against Vic Metro and Vic Country. So a couple of more trial matches for those players to finalise selection for that squad, and then a chance in the Young Guns for the best 19-year-olds to showcase their talents. The AFL Academy, as you mentioned, and the Northern Academies are going to get their Coates Talent League seasons underway as well. So that's really exciting. We'll get to see some of the players who we haven't yet seen, or we might have just seen them in the one or two academy games. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Plenty to unpack. You'll have your finger on the pulse, and you can keep up to date on Zero Hanger and through all of our Craft of the Draft channels. And we'll catch you next week.